Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this part two, looking at wisdom around the COVID vaccine. We're so glad you've been able to join us. If you missed part one, then that's still available on Facebook, on the Rediscover Church Facebook page, or on the Rediscover YouTube channel, and you can catch up with that some other time. We will assume that a lot of what we looked at the other night is already in our understanding. We will do a little bit of a summary, but it won't be as in-depth as we did on the first broadcast. My name is Pastor Mark Pugh. Don't often use that title, a bit official, isn't it? But I was reading it off a list here. No, I wasn't. It doesn't say pastor. But I'm the pastor of Rediscover Church. And I'm no medical expert. I have as many questions about vaccines as you do. I have no agenda about instructing us whether we should or shouldn't take the vaccine. I have three concerns as a pastor, and that is that the people that I'm entrusted to care for are well, and I have concerns about that in every part of our lives. And I see that COVID is ripping apart so many people's well-being, and I'm concerned about that. I want us to be wise, and wisdom requires us to get good input, good advice, to open our hearts, to listen well, to explore the possibilities. And so it's my desire that we, the people of God, sons and daughters of God, will be wise. And it's also my desire that we be Christ-like in how we engage. There's nothing wrong with having different opinions, and yet you wouldn't believe that to look at some of the things on social media. There's a clear line gets set, and so many people just seem to have problems with having a viewpoint disagreed by others. And I want to say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with coming to different conclusions, but it's how we handle that. It's the grace we handle that with is so important. And there is a Christ-like way of being able to approach conversation and discussion, and making sure that it doesn't descend in any of our disagreements or our different perspectives by name calling or by minimizing or patronizing someone else or thinking that we're superior to them in some way. And so those are my desires: be well, be wise, and be Christ-like. But I've really wanted to get more understanding about the vaccine. And I thought it'd be really good not just to go to some professional voices, but professional voices who I know well and I trust their motive. There are some narratives around that make it sound like there's few independent people around, that there's a system, that there's some sort of conspiracy around that is trying to get everybody to conform in a certain way. And the people that we're going to be talking with tonight, I know them well. I know they're independent thinkers. I know they're lovers of Jesus. And they're not coming on to try to twist our arms or convince us in any way. They're just coming on to give up their professional opinion on the matters of the vaccine or the vaccines that soon will be coming on stream, it looks like, regarding COVID. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring into the stream live tonight. We got Mary, GP Mary Embleton, who practices in Plymouth. And we're so glad you're able to join us live this evening, Mary.
Thank you.
And also Afi, who is Post Doctoral Researcher and lectures on a whole range of matters that are pertinent to the issues of exploration around vaccines. So guys, thanks for being with us again. This is 2 nights this week that we have lent upon you, and we really appreciate you giving us some time, just of your own free will, to try and help us have some of the understanding. You've both got brains that are so big, and and I know that there is understanding that you have around a whole range of things that not even our language is able to comprehend if we're not moving in the same circles as you. But you're both very good at trying to explain it in a way that a novice like myself can understand in some way. So thank you so much for that.
We'll try.
Mary, could you just give us a little bit of a summary of where you felt we got to the other night, some of the things you touched on, just in a, not to go over the ground again, but just to maybe help people catch up or trigger their memories from the other night?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear. It's great.
Cool. So we talked about medical ethics and how doctors have a really high level of ethics, and not just doctors in the UK, but doctors in America as well. Everybody is trying to do their best. They have to. They don't make decisions on their own about things like this. They're peer reviewed. All the studies are peer reviewed over and over again, and they're studied by lots of different doctors. There's no chance of sneaky microchips coming in or anything like that. And we also talked about the need for many people to be vaccinated in the UK. And I think somebody put that in the questions, like, if you're a young person, should you be vaccinated? Well, you're less likely to die from it, but you may get long COVID. 1 in 10 people are getting long COVID. And for the good of our society, we need as many people as can get vaccinated to get vaccinated, because there will be some people that can't.
That's a really helpful summary, Mary. Thank you for being so succinct on that. And Afi, just give us your recollections of the summary, just from some of the things you looked at the other night.
Yeah, the other night we talked about the mRNA vaccine, how new it is to the world compared to the traditional way of bringing up vaccines, with people bringing up concerns as to whether the vaccine was brought up too quick. And one of the points Mary had raised was that the vaccine wasn't like it was too quick, but the world was able to summon more scientists, put in more money to push the process forward. But we're also dealing with, for example, the Pfizer vaccine, we're dealing with a technology that it's easier to produce. But for the Oxford vaccine, They were already working on the SARS virus, but of a different species of SARS. So they literally continued from there on by just inserting genetic material from the new coronavirus. So it was easier to move on from there. So it's not like the process was there was shortcuts, but it was easier to move on from where they started. And the mRNA vaccine is a much simpler technology to develop vaccines.
Okay. So somebody asked the other night, what are the benefits of the mRNA over the more traditional vaccines? Because this is brand new technology, isn't it?
It is.
And it's not just a big moment if it's successful for a treatment of COVID. It's potentially a big breakthrough moment for the treatment of many illnesses in society.
That's right, Mark.
And my understanding is that much of the research from mRNA vaccines have been in conjunction to years of research around cancer treatments. That's
right.
what I'm reading. So,
Yeah.
do one of you want to answer that? The benefits of mRNA over the more traditional vaccines?
That's Afi's department.
I'll take it. So the benefits of mRNA vaccine is that, one, you don't have to deal with the live virus within the lab in order to try and modify it or attenuate it so that it gets to a level where it's no longer violent or can cause disease. You're just dealing with a strand of genetic material that you use to inform the body to make a carbon print of what the criminal looks like, rather than actually taking the criminal and putting in to take a mugshot. The criminal could start harming the military guys who are holding the criminal hostage. So rather than send the criminal, they just send the picture. That's a simple way of putting it. And so one thing is that it would avoid people dealing with the microorganism, and which could lead to infection within the lab. I put a bad history here. In 1955, the polio vaccine was not well killed, and it led to over 200,000 people being infected. That can't happen with the mRNA vaccine, for instance. You are less likely to harm people because you're putting just an information for a particular protein, which would not be harmful. But there are now concerns, I suppose you've read from the news, as to whether the mRNA vaccine, the allergy of two people, you would realize that the clinical trials was done in over 44,000 people. But you have to remember that in clinical trials, there are exclusion criteria. Pregnant women are not in. People, they start including them as the study goes on and on. And this is 10 months. They couldn't have included everybody. So they start with the group that is healthy and strong, and then they move on to other groups of people to add the variables to understand the vaccine more and more.
In many ways, from what I understand from what you just said there, that it's not all sewn up. That there is a sense of, like, on Tuesday alone in the UK, there were 10,000 people, from my understanding, vaccinated, and there were two allergic reactions. So it's not a big amount in comparison to 10,000.
That's right.
But if the clinical trials were just 44,000 in one day, a quarter almost of the clinical trials were given the vaccine. So it's going to be all sorts of reviews done in the weeks ahead, I would imagine. Is that a correct understanding?
That's a correct understanding. And mind you, the knowledge from the vaccine is only 10 months old. There's still a lot we're going to understand as the days go ahead. But one of the questions which would link again to the benefits of the mRNA vaccine, I'm going back to the question, but also going to other questions, is that because it's a piece of genetic material, you can literally sequence it with chemicals. You don't need additional material, and so it can be done quicker. The downside is it needs to be kept under very cool conditions, and that's around -70. So because RNA is very unstable and it might disintegrate, but you can literally sequence the chemistry really quickly, and so such vaccines can come off really quickly, unlike the other ones where you have to grow the microorganism and try to look for a way to make it not to be violent as it normally is.
Yeah, if I can just summarize just a picture that you've used on 2 occasions now, and I had a pastor contact me a couple of days ago and said he found this one of the most helpful analogies, that the mRNA vaccine is a bit like sending a photograph to the security guards and say, if you see this person,
That's right.
be on guard. Whereas the live vaccine is introduced, it is something of somewhat of the criminal really coming in,
That's right.
and they're learning their suspicions from actual engagement. So that's a right analogy, isn't it?
That's the right
Yeah.
analogy, Mark. That's just the best way to put it.
It's really helpful.
Sending a piece of the fragment or a mugshot rather than bringing the criminal in and then happening to deal with it.
Sorry to transfer years of scientific language and understanding into an analogy of a mugshot and a security guard. But thank you for your patience with us.
That's brilliant.
Mary, someone said, is it worth having the vaccine if you're under 60? You sort of touched on this a little bit in your opening. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so there's going to be a group of people that won't have, like pregnant people, children, all sorts of people that can't have the vaccine. And what we'll need to do is have enough people vaccinated in the UK so that it stops circulating in the community. So as I said in the last video, that people are going to need to have it to protect other people. And I'm definitely going to have it. I will be having it very soon, I think. So I'll tell you how it was. Yeah, so I would recommend, if you can have it, that you should have it. And as I said before, long COVID is pretty nasty. And I have communication with lots of young doctors and nurses who've had COVID and have got long COVID and are very sick and have been off work for many, many months.
Okay, great stuff. Somebody asked a question the other night, and I know you answered in the chat, but the advice is that pregnant women or women trying for babies shouldn't have the vaccine. But the question was asked, should the guy in that relationship be concerned about having the vaccine if he was also involved in trying for the baby? Mary, you picked that one up on the conversation. Do you want to answer that one?
Well, the reason you wouldn't give it to a pregnant woman is because of the teratogenic effect on the fetus, that we don't know what effect the vaccine might have crossing the placenta into the fetus. We don't know that yet. And I think they will have to do more studies, probably animal studies, to find out exactly what happens. But there is no problem at all for a man if they're trying to get pregnant.
Yeah. To add to Mary's answer, if you look at the clinical trials, I did say if you want to know really about what they did during that clinical trials, you go to clinicaltrials.gov and look for Pfizer COVID vaccine. You'd find the details there, and you'd find that pregnant women were not put into the studies. They had to start with people who to see whether they could tolerate the vaccine first, then move on to whether it's raising an immune response, then move on to whether it's actually preventing you from COVID. You have to answer a sequence of questions. And so they did this, and I think subsequently they'll answer the question for pregnant women. But one of the important things that people brought up was that the messenger RNA produces a protein which has a sequence resemblance. I was trying to look for a more simple word. A sequence resemblance to a protein that is found in the womb of pregnant women. It's called the scientists call it syncytin-1. The truth is that nobody knows as yet, but Pfizer has answered the question by saying that the resemblance is just a very much small portion, and that the immune response can't just be mounted towards the womb as yet. And so it's mostly women that express this protein. Men don't express it a lot, so we don't have any concern for men taking the vaccine.
Okay, great. There was one more question asked the other night, which we didn't get time to cover. And I think, Afi, you felt it was a little bit, the answer could be a bit political. So I don't want us to get drawn in too much on the politics of this, but has coronavirus been around for quite a while? Obviously, we've been aware of it probably since last autumn in China and then introduced to this country. Some people were just intrigued really as to whether it'd been around longer than that. Afi, I know you'd have some insight into that.
So viruses have, I mean, the first virus was identified around 1930, 1931. Just 30 years after that, coronaviruses were identified, the human ones, but they were mostly identified in animals. The human ones that were identified caused mild infections. So it wasn't a life-threatening thing. It was just probably a flu-like symptom, and then it goes away. Fast forward 2002, you had this the severe acute respiratory syndrome in China from the Guangdong province. I'm not going to break my tongue with that. And that was the first human that was the first time the coronaviruses became a problem of humans. People died, and it raised a red flag. Oh, we've not been looking at this, but they've been there since 1960. But it became a matter of interest only when it started killing people in China, 2002. Fast forward 2005, when the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome came up, and then vaccine research started. So they have been looked into, maybe not into as much, with much interest until it hit us hard.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for giving us that insight there.
Can I just pick up on the allergy thing quickly? Somebody just asking a question about that in the chat.
Somebody's just asking.
There we go. Emily's asking that. Hi, Emily. So doctors' idea of allergies is a very specific thing. And lots of people say, oh, I'm allergic to pollen, I have hay fever, or I'm allergic to milk or dairy or wheat and it upsets my tummy and that kind of thing. A lot of people use allergy in that kind of way. That is not how doctors use the word allergy. So you'll know if you have one of these serious allergies if you carry an EpiPen. So you would have had a really serious reaction to, say, usually things like peanuts and foods like that, maybe bee stings. So you'll be carrying an EpiPen and you would have had a horrible reaction where you go bright red and itchy and get wheezy and your tongue swells up. And it was recommended that people would be very careful if they had those problems for having the vaccine. And the two people that did have the allergic reaction were the people that are carrying EpiPens. So they already were predisposed to this. And a vaccine, all the time we give vaccines in the practice, and we're always aware that anybody could have one of those reactions at any time. So we're always ready to jump in with the right treatment.
That's great. It's really helpful. Guys, there's not a scenario where any medication is given to anybody for anything that is risk-free, is it? When someone goes into a hospital for a standard procedure, there are risks attached to that. When someone goes on the football field to play a sport that they love, there's risks attached. People die playing football. And there is no way that you as two medical professionals can say that there is no risk attached to this vaccine, is there? How would you advise people to manage up the balance of that risk? Either Mary maybe start off, or Afi, or either of you.
I'll just start and Mary can pick up from there. So what the Research Ethical Committee for England has done is that they've taken the constituents of the vaccine and they've put it out there. If you're allergic to any of these, then you shouldn't take the vaccine. I think that's one thing. It's just seeing whether, because there are people out there who are really severely allergic to stuff, and what they do is they go into a hospital and they do a batch of allergens. And so you would have something similar to it, and you can just look at the list before you go up and say, oh, I actually have an allergy to this. Apparently, it looks like a component of the vaccine. You can bring that up before taking up the vaccine. Is the way I would look at it if I suffer from severe allergies.
Okay. Mary, anything to add to that?
Well, with regards to risks of taking it, I've read the whole study, and really what the main problems are they, I don't know if any of you have had really exotic vaccines, which I have for all the places I visited, like rabies and yellow fever and things like that. You get a really sore arm and you feel a bit poorly for a few days. And there were quite a large percentage of people that got that. About 85% of people got a sore arm, and about 50% of people felt unwell in some way for 2 or 3 days afterwards. But that's not unusual for a vaccine. But really, that's what struck me, that really there wasn't anything else that made me concerned in that study. And actually, we're actually a few months into it. People have actually had it a few months ago now. So there's conditions like Guillain-Barré syndrome, where you can get this awful weakness as a result of immunological result. And there's been no episodes of that either.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Just
Mark,
three
there's a question. Yeah, I've just seen a question up on YouTube.
Yeah, so I've got a few questions here. I'll put a few of them up on the screen, and then feel free to answer whichever ones they are. So I have a question: why do we need a vaccine when we already have extremely cheap, proven, effective pharmaceutical, as well as that word? I'm going to display my novice abilities, and I can't pronounce, options available for prevention and treatment of COVID-19. Same person's asked a second question: how can we trust figures of infection rates when the PCR test is unreliable? Both Adam Brooks and Cambridge University labs have shown -50 and 100% rates of false positives.
I'll answer that.
Okay, go for it.
Well, what I would come back to about the COVID vaccine is we don't seem to be doing terribly well with what we have without the vaccine, I have to say. It's potentially, we might even end up in a third lockdown. And so without introducing that, I think we are going to struggle to get on top of this disease and see more and more deaths.
And, I'm reading that comparisons with other illnesses like influenza is just an unfair, the impact of this is so much more significant. You can't put those two together. That's what I'm reading. I don't know if you'd agree with that. But, certainly, even if it's just the lockdown, the response to trying to manage this in society, the impact on people's mental health, the impact upon economies, the impact upon people's social well-being is now revealing itself as so significant, isn't it? And surely we want to avoid that in society. Afi, did you have some thoughts around the question as well?
I think there's a popular phrase that goes, prevention is better than cure. If you prevent using the vaccine, then you're less likely to have the very traumatic effects that come with actually getting infected with COVID. I think long COVID, as Mary has put it right, it can be real. It can put you down for a very long time. Recovery period can be very long, and I mean, people are dying. If you can prevent that, rather than waiting for the infection to come and then start treating it, then it's better. And then again, to the question of male fertility, if you actually prevent COVID, so there's a good study out there that showed that people who were infected with COVID had a lower sperm count, which goes to say it's better to take the vaccine than to start struggling to have a baby later on and there's nothing to show for.
There's certainly a really struggling trust within society, isn't there, for people in all forms of professions, right across the board. That you can get difference of views from pastors, prophets, medical workers, researchers, politicians. There's such a variety of views, and it feels like trust is at such a low ebb for people in authority that if someone says something that you don't feel comfortable with, then there must be some hidden agenda that they have, and they're doing that. And there's a lot of that around, and it's ever so difficult to dispel that, isn't it? Because if you try and speak into it, they think you're part of whatever this response is of lack of trust. And I would just advise people, this is probably my area more as a pastor than any of the medics here, but if you have a trust problem with people generally in life, then it's hardly surprising you can have trust issues with those who are trying to put facts on the table regarding this. And I just, encourage you to look inwardly and allow the love of God just to come close to you and help you find some healing from some of those things. Not everybody's out to get you. Not everybody's wanting to harm you. I think that there are a lot of people trying to do a lot of good here that are being accused of a lot of, motivation that's unhealthy and not good.
Right.
So there's one more. Go for it.
The second question which followed was that of the testing method, PCR, and I use the method a lot of times in the lab. I can explain to you how the process goes. It's as simple as this. We want to be able to test over 500,000 samples per day. Remember, these are delicate samples. You've got to be able to test that number of people with the technique is laborious. It's a lot of work. And so what they do is do pools of about 16, 8, 16, do it. When they do the batch, if that batch is positive, then they have to do the individual. That's how to cut time to meet up with the time frame that they've given everybody, which is about a 48-hour turnaround time. And so to say that PCR is unreliable is an understatement. I think PCR is very much reliable. I think they are having to deal with a lot of samples. It's not about, I don't think they are false positive. They might be false negative because of the dilution they have to do because of pulling samples together. But it's less likely for false positive to occur. And if they occur, there are two PCR methods that happen here. But I think they're using the more sensitive of the two, because I do test these. So I know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Time is gone, and I want to respect everybody's time this evening, and none more so than yours, Afi, because when you said yes to doing this part 2, I'm not quite sure how much you realise it was your daughter's birthday. So we do need to let you go in just a moment so you can sing happy birthday to her. But here's 3 quick questions. Doesn't the allergy of the vaccine depend on which type of vaccine you're taking? The Pfizer is not the only vaccine manufacturer. It's the only one licensed at the moment, isn't there? But the others are, certainly the Oxford one is following.
Oxford one will be very soon, yes.
Yeah.
There's a question here about Henoch-Schönlein purpura. That's Lynn's daughter. It's really hard to know what causes HSP. It can literally just be going out in cold weather or having an upper respiratory tract infection. So although she got it after her primary IMS or preschool IMS, it might not have been that caused it. Certainly there's no connection of immunizations causing HSP. So no, she should be fine. It's a completely different kind of vaccine anyway.
Okay, that's great. And then I'm going to make this the last question. This come through from Kathy. Those people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, who potentially will be very ill from getting COVID, cancer patients, for example, how do you balance the risk from having the vaccine if you are immunosuppressed?
Well, if somebody is in the middle of having chemo, then they're not going to give the vaccine. But cancer patients go through periods of having chemo for a few weeks or a few months, and then they have a break, and then their white cell count will come back up, and then they will be able to have it, but not in the middle of a bout of chemo for sure.
Yeah, and Trish was right with her question on allergy depending on the vaccine. It does depend on the vaccine. The vaccines don't have the same constituents, so yeah, the allergy would really be dependent on the vaccine that you're taking. So
great. Well, Mary and Afi, thank you so much for joining us again this evening to help us to not drive an agenda, but just to try and help us have some insights into the learning and experience that you've had. Thank you everybody else for joining us as well, for being people that want to gather information around your table in order to make wise decisions. And we pray that as you continue to read and learn and open your heart, that the Lord will grant us wisdom. And let's pray that COVID will be gone in our society, that it will stop ravaging lives and communities and impacting our lives. And let's pray that the nation will turn back to Jesus as well. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and bless you all. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.